Good to meet you.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show.
You're very welcome. I was really glad that you asked. I've been following you on Twitter.
So, have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Say that again, my darling.
Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Yes, I was watching the one with the gentleman from the army.
Okay. So, so what you felt?
You know what? I think it's really good the way that you connect with so many different people from different walks of life that are just very different from different countries, the international vibe. I think it's really special. That's why when you asked, I was just like, I was, even though I'm very nervous, I was actually really honored, and it felt good to be a part of like what feels like a global community that you're building for yourself, you know.
Awesome. Thank you. For being a part of my show and giving your valuable time to me.
No man, same. We both like it's the same, you know. It's like this.
So, can you set your camera? I can't see you completely.
Uh
Your face is not fitting in the camera.
that's ever so strange. 'Cause I can see myself.
Yeah, I can see,
Uh
your complete face. I can't see.
how about now?
It's better.
Do I need to, it's better further away, yeah?
Yeah, if you be little far, you will see.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This is very good.
Okay.
Yeah, this is very good. So, uh, can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Hi, so my name's Natalie. I go by the name Coded Carbon, which carbon is at the root source of all life, and coded because I'm actually just stepping into the coding development arena as a complete career change. So that's me.
Awesome. So, I have seen your profile. You are into coding.
Yeah, yeah. I So last year, like I say, because of the pandemic and what have you, the UK went into lockdown around March. Around June or July, I heard of a course where it was a group of people sort of self studying to learn AWS. And then in September, I gained my AWS Cloud Practitioner, the sort of junior entry point qualification. And I've always been interested in coding, how things work. From watching I don't know if you've heard of them, the Matrix movies and whatnot, and just I like the zeros and ones, binary, just the simplicity but yet complexity of it. I think it reflects life really well, and I've just been fascinated. So I have gone on a journey to learn development. Currently learning development, solutions, coding. I'm really interested in security also, learning Python, CSS, and HTML currently. And there's a few other languages that I'd like to learn too. So that's where I am.
Nice, nice. So you're from England.
Yes.
Awesome. So, so you said you did cloud practitioner certification. So I wanted to you to tell my audience how to implement IAM, EC2, S3, and auto scaling, CloudWatch, Elastic Cache, CloudTrail, security, and security groups today.
Oh wow. Okay, cool. So I'll start with the basics of IAM, which is, oh gosh, I can't remember what the I stands for. The AM is access management. Is it internal access management? That's really bad. But basically, what IAM does in AWS, it allows. So you start off with an AWS account that can do many things. First, you either need to create an individual user, or you need to create a group, or you need to create a role. What I mean by that is an individual user would be like myself. I have an AWS account and I want to make an app, for instance, in my AWS account. I could go in as Coded Carbon and make my app. But say as my business grows now, I maybe want to hire an admin person or have an admin team. I may want a team of developers. I may want a team for finance, etc., etc. So in terms of groups now, I could create the HR group, I could create the admin group, I could create the development group, etc. And then what I would do is, as I hire people, I can then in and via the IAM, the IAM route, I can assign people to particular groups. So I may hire, I don't know, for instance, my little sister may want to come on board. She may be really good at marketing. So I will create an IAM user with her name and assign her into the marketing group, for instance. My husband might be great at finance and accounting. So I may create a user for him with his name, an individual user account. I'd assign permissions to his account that is only to do with finance. So basically, I'll explain this in a moment when I get to the security aspect, and then I would assign that user to the finance group. IAM can also be used to give permissions in a security aspect. I think it's best if I follow on to security. So the way that AWS works is they work on a premise of least security needed. So for instance, if I was going to create an S3 bucket, now an S3, which is there's three S's, why it's called S3, something, oh gosh, I can't remember what they're called. It's basically a space where you can store information, data. You can also possibly host your website platform on there if you configure it in the right way. But it is basically storage. At any point, if I'm going wrong or anything, stop me. Or if you need to ask anything or clarify anything, Sai, please feel free to stop me. Yeah.
Okay. So
All right.
can you practically show me by using the account?
Um. Let's see.
It will be more clear, right?
Yeah. Well, hold on a second. Uh. I need to find.
Sure.
Hmm. And this is actually a really good it's a really good resource. Okay, I haven't used Skype in ages, so please bear with me. I'm trying to figure out how to share the screen.
You can,
Ah, I see it. I
yeah.
see it. Okay. So this is something called Quick Labs. It's a really good resource. Some of the resources on there are paid for. Some of them are free. So for instance, you may have an introduction to AWS, um, the IAM, Identity and Access Management. That's what it stands for. Sometimes it's better to have it and see it there. I'm not fluent in it. I
Yeah.
know what it does and how to use it.
y-
So, okay, can you see that now?
Yeah, I can see it clearly.
Okay. So, this is used from a website called amazonquicklabs.com. And what Quick Labs does is for people that are studying that maybe need experience with using the different services and apps within AWS. Some of them are free, some of them work on a credit basis where you have to buy credits. So one of the basics that they give, which is actually free, is AWS IAM, which stands for Identity and Access Management. So as I was saying before, AWS works on the premise that to keep things really secure, you only give a user or a role like the least amount of permission that it needs to execute that role. So for instance, an admin person may not have permissions to do anything with finance, or a finance person may not have anything to do with EC2 or Cloud9 or S3. Does that make sense? Likewise, if you've got a developer that may be using Stack, CloudFront, or any of the other services, what have you, they may not have permissions to have or enter finance. So hopefully, and in AWS IAM is where you configure who has what permissions. So I'm going to go to IAM now. There's two ways you can go there. Because these have been recently visited, they're here. But what you can do is go to the search bar and literally type in IAM, and it comes up, and you'll go and you'll select it. Okay. Now, what you'll do is we're going to look at some IAM users and some groups, and then we're going to look at something called policies, which your policy is kind of your permissions, like basically the permissions that each group, user, or role has is defined by having certain permissions, if that makes sense. Okay?
Okay.
So first thing we'll do, so we've logged in. So we're going to look at users and groups, which we're in here now. On the left hand side, we're going to select something called users. So these are individual people. This, because it's a learning based environment, there's some things that have already been populated just to give you a feel of what it would look like. So for instance, there's user 1, 2, and 3. So first we're going to click user 1, and then there's going to be, what that does is it brings up a summary page for that user. On the summary page for that user, you'll be able to see what permissions they have. So at the moment, you can see it says you do not have permission to perform this operation, because basically any permissions have to be added to the role. You can also see if there's any groups assigned that the user is assigned to, any tags. At the moment, they have 2 tags. One is the lab name and one is the customer name. That doesn't really matter so much right now. There's also security credentials, so you'll be able to see what security. So it's saying that there's a link. So basically, each user and their permissions will have a distinct link that they can use to sign into their console. There's a password, something called an MFA device. MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. MFA is an increased level of security. So basically, for some of us, we may have, I don't know, a Twitter account or a bank account or something like that. When we log in, it might say, okay, we're going to send as an extra layer of security, we're going to send a code to your phone that you can then input to say that there's, deeper security. MFA works in a similar kind of way. There's one that's called Authy that's used, and what it does is it generates codes like every 30 seconds. So you'd connect your MFA to your account, and it would ask you to give a code from your MFA device, which can be on your phone or on your laptop, what have not, and it will say what it is here because you configure it in your admin will configure it here. There's something called an access key, which you may not necessarily, if you're a user you joining an organization, you may not necessarily use or create yourself. Somebody, say an admin, may create that for you. SSH keys are keys that you use. So SSH is used to get into the command line interface, or CLI, or just CMD, which is a little bit in depth for now. We can do that later on. I don't want to confuse the issue. But you can use something called PuTTY to generate keys, and Amazon also creates keys. But let's get back. So basically, Access Advisor is another service that AWS has, and it will say what services you're allowed as this user one, to access. It's very clearly defined in sort of least amount of access basis. So you can see for this account, user one is basically allowed to, at the moment, it hasn't been granted anything. Okay, so that's fine. So user one. So there's no permissions. So now we're going to check out groups, user groups, which is here. So there are different groups that you can have. You can create the groups using the create group button depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So for this example, we've got admin. So there's an admin group. There's an EC2 support. We'll get to EC2 shortly. QL read only, I'm not sure what that is. And S3 support, which is the security bucket, the storage. Okay. Right, so for now, we're going to go to the EC2 support group, and by selecting a group, it will tell you who's in the group, which at the minute there's nobody. You'd have to provision those yourself if you're the admin person. It tells you what permissions it has. So it's the EC2 support group. So as it's only support, the policy that's on there, which is the permission, says that there's Amazon EC2 read-only access. What that's telling us is that because it's only a support group, we're not going to be actually running or making anything in there. We can only read what's going on. We can't do any actions to it, if that makes sense. I can click on that policy and show you a little bit of what that means. There is a policy summary. It's in two ways. It's in regular normal English, and then there's something coded language, which is similar to a Python, HTML or whatever, but this one's called JSON. And some of you may be familiar with JSON, some of you may not, but it's basically a code language, and it will tell you what permissions that this policy has. But if we skip back to the more simplified version for now, it's telling us that for AWS CloudWatch, we have a limited, you got your access level, because basically AWS works on the least access that you need to complete your task. So it's saying for CloudWatch, it has a limited access, and the accesses are that it can list something and it can read that list. So the EC2 support may get a report from CloudWatch to say, for instance, we've got these ugly gremlin hackers that are trying to hack your EC2. So it will tell you, CloudWatch will create a list of saying, okay, this URL, this IP address is sending hostile requests to your EC2. It's trying to get in there and read your data. So you need to be able to, as the EC2 support, you need to be able to get that list and to be able to read it so you can then follow on to the actions. Does that make sense? Hello, are you still with me? Sai?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. I put you on mute.
Is it making sense or is it getting boring?
Yeah, no. I'm understanding it.
Okay. And can you see the screen I'm speaking about?
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay, because I'm jumping between screens, so just please bear with me. If any reason or you're not sure of anything, please stop me.
But I can see the same screen. We are on Identity and Access Management, IAM.
So let's see something, because I need you to see. Hold on. I need you to see. Maybe I need to share all the screens so as I jump between. Okay. Right.
Yeah, I can see now.
Okay. So from this screen here, the permissions, I went into what those permissions are.
Okay.
So this is what I was actually explaining from. So once you click on what the permission is, you can see that there's, for CloudWatch, your EC2 support role has the permission, a limited access permission to list and read from CloudWatch all of the resources. For EC2, again, because it's because the role is EC2 support, or sorry, the group is the EC2 support group. So they're basically the group. The group serves to ensure that EC2 support is kept up. There can be many people in that group at the moment. As we can see, there's nobody in there. That will come later, and I'll show you how to add the person to the group. But for now, we're looking at permissions, what permissions the EC2 group has. So anybody in that group will also have the permissions to do that. So instead of giving individual people lots of access and you're having to manage that, you can say, okay, there might be 10 people, 10 EC2 users, user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And instead of giving each of those individual 10 people EC2 support roles, what you'll do is create an EC2 support group and add those 10 users to that group. So you attach the permission to the group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm understanding.
Okay. So then that way you've got the EC2. So the policy that the permissions policy that we have, they can access these things. So basically auto scaling. So auto scaling, for instance, there's two ways that you can auto scale. You can auto scale vertically, so that means from bottom to top or top to bottom. With vertical scaling, what that speaks about is, say for instance, you have a cup that can hold 1 liter of water, or a bottle that can hold 1 liter of water, but you are getting more water than 1 liter. So you need to increase the size of your bottle to hold more water. Does that make sense? So what with vertical scaling, scaling means to basically increase or decrease, yeah? But for vertical scaling, what it would mean is if you had a liter bottle but 2 liters of water, you would have to increase the size of your bottle to accommodate the other liter of water. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so in terms of auto scaling, or basically for EC2, which we'll get into, but for now, as a concept, to vertically scale an EC2, it means to increase the size of it, and by increasing the size, you can't then decrease the size after. If you need, I don't know, a machine that has 10 gigs of RAM and I don't know, 526 CPU, but that's not being able to handle the amount of data that's coming at it, you need to increase it to, I don't know, 20 gigs of RAM and 1000 CPU. You can scale it and make it bigger to accommodate the data, but then you can't make it smaller again. Okay, that's vertical scaling. Yeah. But then there's another type of scaling which is called horizontal scaling. Horizontal scaling means, like, suppose you have two machines that normally handle all your requests for your website, but you have a promotion on for, say, a bank holiday or a special celebration day. It could be Christmas, it could be whatever. It could be, a celebration. So you're going to get more traffic to your website. So maybe normally you'd have 1,000 visitors a week, but you know that because of this special celebration, you're going to get 100,000 visitors. If two machines normally handle your 10,000, or whoever it is that normally comes, to handle 100,000, you're going to need more machines. Horizontal scaling would mean that you would create, I don't know, maybe another 6 or another 8 machines that can then spread that load of your incoming requests. So you go from 10,000 to 100,000. So now you need more machines to manage those requests. And horizontal scaling will create more machines as opposed to having one machine and making it bigger. Does that make sense or not?
yeah, yeah,
And basically, an auto scaling is something that you can do where you can configure and basically tell this auto scaling policy that, okay, if there's a certain amount of requests coming in, or we are running at 70% capacity, anytime we're running at 70% capacity, create another machine so that we can distribute that incoming traffic evenly, where none of the machines are going to be over capacity. And because you want to make sure that your capacity is where it can be managed, because you wouldn't want a case of where you're over capacity and it causes one of your machines to fail, because what that will do is then these are virtual machines, by the way, but what that will do is it will cause your website to either run slow or not be accessed, for instance. So what you want to do is make sure that you've always got enough capacity to manage your incoming requests. You might have 100,000 users around the world who tap into, for instance, if we take YouTube as an example, can you imagine if I don't know, maybe the football's on, so there's soccer, what's the I'm not really a sports person. That was a really terrible example to speak on something. It's only because I know there's nations all around the world that play. So, there's a particular oh gosh, I'm not sure what it's called though. Basically, when all different teams from around the world compete, YouTube knows that it may have like millions of people who log in on a daily basis, but because of different time zones, it gets staggered. But say if there's a particular match on at a particular time on a particular day, they're going to be anticipating more people logging on to watch that match as well as their other normal traffic at that time. Say if the match is between, I don't know, USA and Germany, and it's on at, I don't know, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, they know at that time they need to make sure they've got more capacity for the extra users that are going to be coming in to watch that match. Does that make sense? So they can either hire another 40, I don't know, 50, 100 people to manage provisioning those machines, or they can set something which is called auto scaling to make sure that anytime their users increase by a certain amount, they can create the amount of machines that they need to cover that usage. Does that make sense? Or am I
Yeah,
getting confusing?
yeah,
If it's at any time confusing, please let me know so that I can clarify.
yeah,
Yeah?
definitely. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. And we can see from this permission that the auto scaling service, our EC2 support group, yeah, it has full access to it, and that's to list and read what's happening with the auto scaling group. So EC2 support would need to know, okay, are we scaling in? Are we scaling out? Are we needing to create bigger machines because actually our users have increased and that it's not dropping, so we actually need bigger machines. So remember, we was talking about vertical scaling, which is where the machines actually themselves grow, or horizontal scaling, which horizontal scaling you can scale out, as in creating more machines as your demand increases. But if our demand drops off, we can also shut down some of those machines back to the amount that we actually need to use. So you can scale, and that's called scaling in. So horizontally, you can scale in or out, but scaling vertically, you can only scale up or make your machines bigger, but you can't then make them smaller after, if that makes sense. And you might need to see auto scaling because the EC2 support group might need to see, okay, are we getting more traffic? Is our site gaining traction? Do we need to have where is our most of our traffic coming from? Is there any places where we're getting latency, that the traffic can't manage it? Is it where we might need to say, for instance, if a company set up in Hong Kong and they're finding that they're noticing that each time the users from the States log on, that there's an issue with capacity, they go over capacity and need to scale out or scale up, and it's causing a loss of service because of this, because they can't scale up in time. They might need to find that they might need to copy their website or put it through something, I believe it's called CloudFront. We'll get to that. There's an AWS service called CloudFront where you can actually sort of replicate what it is that you're doing, your site, so that people in the States, you can access it into one of their availability zones. So you might have I'm running ahead a little bit, and I understand that may be confusing. I'll come back to it, pinky promise. So that's just score auto scaling. There's something called an elastic load balancer. What an elastic balancer does is each time you create a machine, such as an EC2, it comes with its own IP address.
Yeah, but the screen is same. I can see the same screen.
You could, yeah, I was
Okay,
explaining.
okay, okay.
Okay,
You're saying about
uh,
load balancing, ELV. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, because I was literally going through the list of permissions that it has, so just explaining a little bit about what each one of them was before I went to it. So let's see. It's kind of hard to see what the load balancer does. I'm not sure if I can create one. I was just explaining why it's there for, if that makes sense, and then it would make sense if when I show you. Hold on a second. So when you create an EC2 machine, it comes with its own individual IP address. There's a public IP address and there's a private IP address, depending on what you want to use that EC2 for. If it's something like a website and it's connected where you need public access, you'll use the public IP address. If you want to use it for something private, like say storing a database, a medical company that wants to store a database, you'd use the private IP address so that the public browsing the internet can't access it. However, every time you refresh the like say access to, so say if you have an EC2 machine and you have the IP address for it, and you type you put that into your browser to access it, each time you refresh or you come back, the IP address changes. So in order, like say if it is a website where you need it to come back, say for instance, I don't know, for instance apple.com, you need that link to stay the same each time so people can come back to the same place. So what you can do is have something called an elastic IP address or an elastic load balancer. So you put your elastic IP to it, which means that no matter how many times you refresh or move away, that stays. So it's elastic, it moves, it kind of moves with the needs that's there. It can kind of stretch, bend, and what have you, similar to an elastic load balancer. So an elastic load balancer, what that does is, say you have 3 machines that host your website. Instead of, and you have you have 6 people that are accessing the website at the same time. To avoid where you might get 6 people accessing one of like machine one because it's the fastest or what have you, an elastic load balancer would say, okay, the first person that searches this site is going to get directed to machine one. The second person that searches is going to get directed to machine two. The third person is going to get directed to machine three. The fourth person, machine one. The fifth person, machine two. So it basically balances it out elastically. So instead of there be one machine being overloaded, it's going to evenly distribute the traffic coming to the site. Does that, so you may have 3 machines that have your site replicated, machine 1, 2, and 3. Instead of any one of those machines being overloaded, the elastic load balancer will literally, the clue is in the name, it's balancing the load. You know, like when you go shopping and you have carrier bags, instead of having 3 carrier bags in one hand and none in the other, or 4 carrier bags in one hand and none in the other, you'll have 2 carrier bags in one hand and 2 carrier bags in the other. And then even though they weigh the same, they're a bit easier to carry now because the load has been balanced more evenly. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
To explain what a load balancer is. Okay, so this is what the permissions have. So the EC2, you can see that the EC2 basically it can speak to a service called CloudWatch. Obviously EC2. It can speak to auto scaling, which is whether the EC2 needs to get bigger or whether it needs to call for backup and friends, or whether it needs to kind of work by itself. An elastic load balancer, and I'm not sure what ELB version 2 is. So let's start to see how these things connect together. So let's see. Right, so now we're going to have a look at adding users to groups. So we're in groups at the moment, but let's go back to groups. So we're going to add a user to an S3 support group. Similar to the EC2 support group, which we saw already, different services and different machines can have different groups, as I was explaining earlier. So we're going to go to the S3 support group as defined. And at the moment, it's got no users in its group. And we're going to add user 1 to, and we do this by you selecting add user. And if you've got your users in there, as this does have, the request is to add user 1 to the S3 support group. So what you do is you select user 1, there's a little square to the left of it, see how it's lit up? So when you go to it, at first you can't see this button on the bottom lit up here, but once you select the users you want, it could be more than one, but for this scenario we're just using user 1. The button's lit up now, so you just click add user. You see at the top it normally tells you whether it's successful or not. There'll usually be a green prompt with a tick, and if it's failed or it's not working, you'll usually see a red banner with a cross if what you've tried to do isn't working. It's quite user friendly. So now you can see in the S3 support group, and you click on users, and now you can see that user 1 has been added to that support group. Yeah, so now they've got a new job, which is great. Okay, so next we're going to add user 2 to the EC2 support group. Okay, so what we do is we go back to groups. All right, 2 ways you can navigate as well. On the left hand side is usually what you want to do. Also along the top you can see IAM, and you can normally go navigate here as well. I prefer to just go here, it helps me focus a little bit, but that's up to you. So EC2 support group user 2. So we go to groups, and then we can see we select EC2 support group. Comes up at the minute there's no users in there, So we need to select add user, user 2. Why did I do that? I clicked on the actual person, didn't I? I didn't follow my own advice. My bad. Select the box, add user, and you can see it's successful. It's green, as well as it telling you that the user has been added to the group. And if you look, you can see that the user is in this group. So next, I'm going to go to groups. Next, we're going to add user 3 to the EC2 admin group. So we're in groups, got EC2 admin group here. We click on the group, so you go into it and you scroll down to users. At the minute there's none, but we're going to click on add user. This time we're going to select user 3 and add user to that. We can see it's successful, and if we scroll down under the users tab, users in this group, we can see that user 3 is successfully been added. So user 3, who may not have had permissions before, now has the permissions that belong to this group to be able to do their role. Okay. Right, so now we're going to sign in and test the users to show how that, basically what the point of that was, which is why I like the labs, because it helps you to really do this. Oh, this lab's going to end in a bit. Doesn't matter. Right, so we're going to ah hmm all right, I might have to restart this because I don't have enough time. I need to sign out and sign back in. It's saying I don't remember having to sign out when doing this. Okay, if we can pause and I can restart this again, please. So,
Yeah.
really somebody that wants to make sure that it's done in a way that people can see it, because I understand there's different learning styles. I learn by seeing and by doing. Some people may be able to learn by seeing. So yeah. Anyway, I digress. Okay, I'm going to continue to share my screen. If at
Yeah.
any time you've got any questions, something isn't sure, you're not sure of what I'm saying, even if it could be an accent thing or what have you, please feel free to just stop me and ask. Okay, and I'm going to grab my charger as well to make sure that we don't lose power. So I'm gonna share my screen and we'll keep it moving. Okay, is that all right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, just grabbing my charger.
Okay.
Okay, I'd also like to say I did make sure say that this is an AWS Quick Labs and what have you. This is what I use to learn with as well. So at some point maybe we'll drop the link as well so that people can access it. Okay,
Yeah.
so now we're going to check where we got to before was in our from our list of users that we had user student, which is myself at the moment who's using this lab, and we had user 1, 2 and 3 who was also added. Can you see? Okay. You're all right, you can see. Okay, all right, cool. So we had a list of users that was already in there, plus myself, I'm one of the users in there. And then we had the groups where we clicked on each group and added someone to each group. For instance, if I click on the QL read only, which stands for Quick Labs, you can see the AWS student, which is myself or which would be yourself, is automatically added to that group. And then remember I said there's two ways of navigating through. One is on the left, user groups, but you see at the top. So we're right in the user groups thing, but we can navigate here and it will take us back to the same place. So you can use whichever way is more comfortable for you at the top or on the left hand side. So we went through and we assigned users. We had 4 users in total, including yourself, and we've assigned 1 user to each group. As you can see, it says a group name, it's got users. See, it's got 1 each in there. It's telling you that the permissions that the group has are defined, and you've got the tick, the green tick, which is like yes, they've already been defined. AWS defined them. We're going to now go in and check whether those permissions have been linked properly, and we're going to do that by selecting over on the left hand side dashboard, which is going to bring us to the IAM dashboard. So this gives more information about the identity and access management section of AWS, of your AWS account. Right, so what we're going to do now is test whether they work, and how we're going to do this we're going to just follow the instructions in the lab. It says that an IAM user sign-in link is displayed, and it will look similar to this. It'll give you an example. This is just an example, but to give you an idea of what you're looking for. Hopefully you can see that where I'm like sort of wiggling my mouse underneath. So let's have a look if we can find it. You see on the dashboard, see where it says sign in URL for IAM users in this account. I did say earlier that this account will have its own URL that you can just find it quicker. Some people might find it more efficient to see. Okay, there's 2 little squares here. If you hover the mouse over them, you can see that it says copy to clipboard. So if you copy that and it flashed up really quickly, it told you that it copies. Some people find it useful, which how we're going to test it is I'm on Chrome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a new incognito window. Yeah, so it's a private window. That's for Chrome. If it's Firefox, you click the menu bars on the top right and select private window. There's different ways to do it. Microsoft Edge, it says click the ellipses at the top right of the screen and click new private window. Or Microsoft Internet Explorer, click the tools menu option and click in private browsing. I'm on Chrome, so I'll click the ellipses as you see, new incognito window. And you see, he's got his little glasses on and his detective hat on. So it's like, yeah, you're going to be a bit private. And that URL that you copied, you're going to paste it there. And you're going to hit enter. So what it's giving you the opportunity to do now is sign in as one of those roles. So let's see first, let me go and get the password. Can you still see that screen, Sai?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm going to go and get the password first because the lab provides you with the password. Obviously, if you were using your own account, it would be slightly different. But for this one, because it's a lab, it gives you what you need and what it's asking you to do. So first, we're going to check to see what permissions user one has. So you type in your username. When you are an IAM user, just note that you'll have an account ID, then you'll have a username, then a password. To keep privacy when you have an AWS account, it's good to make sure that things like your account ID, your password, username not so much, but definitely account ID and password and a few other things are kept private. Again, you want to try and keep your security as high as possible. And somebody that knows their way around a computer, somebody that's a hacker, they could get your details and hack into your account and create mischief. So you're always trying to keep your security in mind by doing simple things. So but this is a student, it's a made up account basically. So just for kind of showing how it works, I think it's safe. So you've got your account ID, which will always be at the top when you're an IAM user. There's two different users, just quickly. There's two different users. There's the root user. The root user is like the CEO, the boss. The root user is what you use to create the account, but you do your work from as an IAM user, even if you're the only person that uses the account. Put it this way, just think of it like this. Regardless of security, like there's a security aspect, but on top, which is a real life aspect, if you are working in AWS using the root user account, please be expecting a gigantic, ginormous bill. It's incredibly expensive. So we don't want to do that. We use the root user to go in to create the account. Yeah, you won't be charged for that. And you create something what can be called a budget, so you can see and then assign permission. Like I think one initial permission, you sign out of the root user because you've created an IAM user for yourself. And then you always do the actual work in AWS as your IAM user. Just think, I am the person that's working. I am, even though it stands for Identity and Access Management, I am the person. So just remember, if you're doing everyday work in AWS, sign in as your IAM user. All right. That was a little aside, but it's really important to remember that. It's one of the main things. It's always good to start at the basics. You can stand firm. Okay, so we're going to test user one, and I'm going to paste the password that I copied in and sign in. And this is in the incognito window. So what it's going to do is not going to confuse that, because the computer, if you sign in, it's just easier. I'd like to see if it works because it believes that it's from a slightly different place. Okay, so we're in, sign in with user one, which I've done. In the services now, because user one was assigned to the S3 support group, so we're going to click S3 and we're going to click the S3 bucket. I'll explain that when we go into the section about S3 buckets. And the name of the S3 bucket is located. So basically, it's called AWS Labs Resources. If you see an error, it means you don't have access to this bucket. But remember, we added user 1 to the S3 support group. It had limited access, so it can't do everything, but it did have, I think it had read and list, which will go back. So we'll be able to see how that works. So now I'm logged in on my incognito as user 1. You can see on the top right hand side, you can see that user 1 is logged in and it's got its details. So again, least access necessary, but we need to access the S3. So go to the search, type in S3 Glacier, and that comes up later. I don't want to overload you with information to start with, just like the basics is good. So let me just double check what the name of the bucket we were looking for is. It's templates. Hold on. Right, there's nothing in that bucket. It's that one, the one with the lab in it. Can you see? Okay, so inside this, what's called a bucket, which is basically a storage container, you can see it's got AWS logs. So the logs come from CloudWatch, possibly through something called CloudTrail. But again, I don't want to. Basically, CloudWatch will be looking what's happening, and it will create something called logs, and those logs get stored in the bucket. So we want to see if we have permission to access those logs. So I'm going in there, CloudTrail. See, there's a lot of information in there. So basically going further and further into a folder, it could tell you. So on today's date, the 28th of April 2021, and on this it's saying last modified at 12:19, which is basically, oh, let's see, 12:24. That's the most recent one for me. It's 12:31 here in the UK, which it tells you what the time zone is in, and etc. etc. So if I click on here, I should be able to see what this message is saying. So it's telling me that CloudTrail, so the CloudTrail is giving the message from the region US East 1. That will make, basically there's different availability zones. We'll talk through that in a second. I mentioned it. That's the AWS region. So the account is created in US East 1. So the region is US East 1. Last modified at this time. Tells you the type and the size. It gives you the key, which is why it's really important not to share your keys, access logs, etc., etc., with others. Because if somebody knows what they're doing, they can hack into your thing, use your resources, and you get billed for it. It gives you information like the S3 URI, what the resource name is. These are things I believe that you would use to SSH into, so basically you can get into these things from this console, which is the AWS UI or user interface. But there's something called a CMD, like the command prompt that you can type in. It's almost like you're going in from the back end. You can use that, or there's I'm on Windows, so you can use the PowerShell, which is a different version of it. There's also something called an AWS CLI or AWS command line interface, which is similar to a CMD or the PowerShell. So it's basically a way of programming and accessing certain things, services within AWS from outside of AWS, if that makes sense. Okay, and these are the sort of maybe information that you might need. There's also something called Cloud9 as well, which is kind of awesome, but I'm learning how to use it. I'm not so versed at explaining it, so bear with me. So it's basically, so we're still in here because we're in the S3 support group. We can still read about the bucket versioning, because remember we logged in as the user that's in the S3 support group. We can see that bucket versioning is something that is disabled at the moment. You don't need to know about that just right now. Tells you what the storage class is, that it's a standard storage class. Says that tells you something called encryption, which means, I believe, SSE is server-side encryption, which means that whether or not you if you send data to this S3 bucket, what will happen is AWS, once it receives that information, it will encrypt it and store it where it needs to be stored. So it'll be like, while AWS is storing it in the cloud, it will be encrypted. I believe that's server-side encryption. AWS, Amazon S3 Master Key, I believe so. I could be wrong, but I believe that's what that means. So I just wanted to be really nosy with that. Bear with me. So now we're going to see what it wants us to do in there to check it. So we're going to test now if we have access. So now we're going to see if I, as the S3 support user, has access to the EC2 virtual machine. So what I'm going to do is in services. Okay, that my teacher said, even though you might see something you want here, not everything, even though I can see EC2 right there, it could be something else, and there's like an exhaustive list and you could be scrolling around for ages. So it's good practice to actually type it in the search button, because then you get to it quicker, it's more direct, it's more efficient. So that's a little tip that I was given. Right, so I've logged into the EC2 access as the S3 support group user, and as you can see, it's saying API error. You see what I was saying before, unhandled error when fetching your key pairs. Remember I was saying in red with an X, that means that something's not gone right. So if I go to instances, see, it's just showing nothing because I don't have access to see what's going on here. Dashboard. To test it out, let's see if we can create something. So I'm going to check because it's saying that the service health is operating normally. But remember, my permissions is for the S3 support group. So I'm going to see if I can create or launch an instance. I'm using Amazon Linux because it's got the free tier eligible. We don't want to be charged for anything, so free tier is good right now. When I went to select it, do you see the red warning sign? Well, notification comes up. An error occurred describing your selected AMI. You are not authorized to perform this operation. So this is a perfect example of how by giving particular roles or groups or users particular permissions, it allows them to do their job. See, we was able to go into the S3 bucket quite deeply. Look, we could see the list of what was going on and what was in there. We could even access in there and see what was written because we had permission to do so. But when we veered from S3 and the permissions that we had as an S3 support user to go into EC2 to say maybe create an EC2, do you see how that permissions is locked down because AWS works on we only give you the permissions you need to fulfill that role or that job or that duty. Anything that you don't need, we won't give you because we want to keep security tight enough. We don't even want cross role work unless it's necessary within the one organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so you see how that worked. So let's sign out of here and we'll test another role really quickly to see how that works again. So sign into the console. All right, this time we're going to sign in as user 2. And this time I believe that user 2 was the EC2 support role, just to see how that works. And I kind of did that from memory. And if you can see, logging in as the EC2 support group user, can you see that most recently visited, well, EC2 and S3. So your most recently visited services usually come up here, but again, it's good to search. So let's see what the next part, we're nearly finished on here. And now we're going to try now. Remember when we were signed in as the S3 support user, we couldn't see anything that was going on. We're now signed in as the EC2 support user. So let's go to EC2 and see if there's any difference. So straight away, you can see the difference. As the EC2 support user, we can see same account, different user. We went to the EC2 this time and we can see it says there's one instance running. It's telling you how many elastic IPs, how many key pairs, etc., how many security groups, how many volumes. Remember before when we went to the EC2, all these were in red and it said something about the API and there was a red cross on there. And then when we went to instances, remember there was nothing in there because we didn't have permission to look at it. Now we can see there's one EC2. Let's see if we can extend this a bit. We can see there's one EC2. It is running. It's passed its 2 checks. There's no alarms. It tells you where it is. Hold on. Once we click on it, right, we can see, remember I said before, there's a private IP address and a public IP address. So the public IP address would be so that you can go into the machine, like searching, like from searching the internet. Let's copy it and see what it does. Maybe something, maybe nothing. If you type it in and you see the wheel keep turning like this, it tells you that it's not designed to be accessed, or there's something in the permissions or the security group that is not allowing you to get into it. See, it can't be reached. That means that basically when you try and access something like that and you can't get to it, it's usually something to do with the permissions or the security group. So that's just to demonstrate that what I was on about. But that's how you'd use the public IPv4 to log in to a machine from outside. And look, there's a private one. So for instance, if you wanted to talk to we'll get into that when we talk about VPCs and things like that. That'll be for another day, because there's something called a VPC, which is a virtual private cloud, and something else called a subnet. When we talk about VPCs, the public and private IPv4 addresses will come into play. But just as I said, that there's a private one and a public one. Different sections of, like, see, that starts. Anyway, I digress. And that's a lot of information for now. But this, see, you've got a red notice here with an X. AWS Compute Optimizer finding. It's saying that we don't have permissions, because I'm sure if we go back and look in our permissions for our EC2 support group, it will say something like maybe list and read, as opposed to actually performing compute optimization. And you need to get that sorted out on the resource, so it tells you. But you see, you can get in and you can look at all the information that's on here, who owns it, platform details, the AMI, so Amazon Machine Image ID, Amazon Machine Image or AMI name, the location, all different kinds of things. You can see the security, the IAM role. It doesn't say what it says. It doesn't say an individual role, but it tells you the security group. Because remember, we wasn't logged in as the IAM user was put into a group. You've got the security group and what that says. You've got inbound rules, port 22, source 00. So it's saying that we can come in, but it's saying that only from these security groups, I think. So it's basically saying you can't, saying you should be able to come in from the internet inbound. Outbound rules, same thing. So basically, when we put the address in and the wheels will keep on spinning, this is where you'd edit it. But for now, I don't need to do that. I don't need to confuse you with that. But just showing you, this is what it looks like, where you tell the machine or what have you where it can receive information from. Okay. You've got information about networking, how everything's connected, network interfaces. It tells you the storage. So it's got is it elastic block storage? I believe that's what EBS is. But so an EC2 can automatically come with an EBS. So this is now a storage type. So you've got your information coming in through your EC2. You may want to store it somewhere. You could store it on an S3, in an S3 bucket. You can store it on EBS. You get one EBS to each machine, EC2 machine, or you can get something called EFS, which is Elastic File Service. So remember, similar to an Elastic IP address or an Elastic load balancer, Elastic means that you can basically take it from one. So say for instance, you've got a machine that crashes, you can take that Elastic thing off that machine that crashes, delete that machine, create a new machine to replace it, and then reattach that Elastic, whether it's IP address, load balancer, or what have you, to the new machine. That's why it's elastic. It can stretch, it can move, it can bend, as opposed to EBS is just for that machine. Whereas elastic file storage is like a huge filing cabinet that you can connect loads of different machines to. Hopefully that makes sense. We won't be able to see all of these in this sitting, but maybe it's something I can speak to Sai and see if we can come back at another time and maybe explain something else. It's just to give you an overall taster. Again, if there's anything that you're stuck on, not sure about, please feel free to let me know. But we can see that I logged in as the EC2 support, as the EC2 support user. We can go to the EC2 dashboard and we can access a lot of information, even though we're not necessarily able to create an instance. Let's check it out and see. I'm going to try and launch an instance. Selecting from the free tier. Oh, T2 micro because it's free tier eligible. Configure instance details. So we want one instance. We know this is automatic. Ignore that. But you see, there's a red warning. I don't have permissions to list instance profiles, contact your admin, or check your IAM permissions. So I don't have permissions to attach my role to it, because my role, even as EC2 support, probably doesn't allow me to create EC2s. But let's see how far it will let us go. Next, add storage. So you see when it says add storage, it's already telling us that it's got a root, a volume type, which is the root, which is that same EBS because it comes with it. Add tags, I can skip that. Security group, we'll keep that. Do you remember when we was talking about the security group and said that it had a TCP port 22 and the zeros? That might not make sense for now. During another lecture it will. For those that it doesn't, it's okay, be patient, it's fine, it will make sense. When I first saw this, I was just like, what language are you speaking? Are you from Mars? Are you from Jupiter? Are you from Venus? But it does kind of make sense now. If we say review and launch, it gives you a warning. It says it's open to the world because it said that when we did the security group, it was on 000, which means that it can be accessed from anywhere on the internet. But if we click on launch, will it let me launch it? If it does let me launch it, I'll delete it completely after. Which I thought that would be the case. See, I tried to launch the machine, so it let me go, and it let me kind of fool with myself. It says launch failed, you're not authorized to perform this operation, and it tells you it's encoded as well. So your CloudWatch would send a message that I've just done this to the S3 bucket where the CloudWatch logs are stored. So the S3 support group, which is where the S3 bucket is, like, they can look at that and see, oh, somebody from the EC2 support group tried to access this Actually, it was user 2. So we can cancel that, but I just wanted to show you that even though I'm in the EC2 support group as user 2, it depends on what the permissions my role has as to what I can do. And I'm pretty sure from the example you just seen, I'm allowed to look at things, I'm allowed to list things, but I'm not allowed to create things to put. Okay? So last thing, maybe another thing to do is, remember I'm logged in as the EC2 support. Let's see if I can go to the S3. See, I don't even have permission to list them. So to look at buckets, I don't have permission because I'm part of the EC2 support group. So going into another machine, meddling and being nosy to things that don't concern me and are not listed in my permissions, it's just an instant block. Even though when we logged in as an S3 user, we saw that there was a lot of information in there as the EC2 user. As a user in the EC2 group, I don't have permission to look at the S3 information. And it tells me straight, it doesn't even try and pretend. You don't have permission to list them, view them. After it says either you or your administrator, I can tell you as user 2, part of the EC2 support group, I won't have permissions to update those buckets because you need to have admin permissions to be able to change the permissions. Does that make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
so that's just showing you that. All right, so hopefully that kind of gives you an overview as to how IAM works, identity and access management. Let me just sign out of these just because of good housekeeping. It's always good when you finish the role to sign out, just for good security purposes, because you could, I don't know, step away thinking, oh, well, I'm going to come back to it, no problem. But you come back to it and if somebody knows what they're doing, they could be really quick. They could be, I don't know, authorizing some bank charges in your name, or to take over your account, or to crash your website. DDoS, which is it dedicated denial of service? Basically, which is something hackers can do. We've heard of it. I think different government security, global services. It's happened to, I don't want to call any names just in case, allegedly, but sometimes you'll hear on the news that this site or that site's been hacked and people's security has been compromised. It could be something as simple as somebody stepping away and leaving their stuff open. They don't know if the person they're working with is a hacker or not, because they're not actually going to advertise like, hey, I'm going to break into your stuff. Do you know what I mean? But that was the overview of IAM with a little bit of an explanation of other services thrown in. I'm thinking maybe it's a case, I don't know, we can maybe speak a little bit more offline side where we maybe go through different machine services on a weekly basis, if that's okay with you. I don't know, we can talk about that. I think it was quite a lot to take in. Maybe your viewers can say and yourself can say whether that's something that you like, that you're open to. Let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. So shall we go? Hold on. There you go. So shall we go to camera so we can chat?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very clear.
Okay. So I think that's where I need to wrap it up for today. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
and I've enjoyed today. It's really helped me to stretch my mind because it's one thing to think you know something, it's another thing to explain it from a place of where you think you know. Um, it's been a really good challenge. I hope that your people find it useful. Um, and that's it. So, hopefully, the first of many Sai carbon link ups. What do you think?
Yeah,
As time allows.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you want to do the sign out or shall I?
Yeah. So you said about what are the services that you said today?
So we covered the IAM, which is at the kind of the root at the heart of AWS, which is the identity and access management. We touched upon EC2 and S3, and we looked at permissions. We looked within the IAM, we looked at users, which are individuals. We looked at groups, which is a group can be responsible, like where a group of people can be responsible for more than for one particular thing. And we saw that a user may not have permissions, but if you add that user to the group, that user inherits the permissions that the group is given. So as we saw, the EC2 group, which I believe is Elastic Compute or something like, I can't even remember. I need to go back and look into some of them. I know what it does and I know where to use it, but I can't remember. So EC2 group, support group users. So as a support group is only allowed to view and maybe like log, list and view information within the EC2. They don't have anybody in that group doesn't have the permissions to say, for instance, view the S3 because of how their permissions are configured. And then the S3 group couldn't, or the users within the S3 group, because they inherited the permissions assigned. It's like, imagine you've got a house and then you've got the bathroom. The people that are in the bathroom, people using the bathroom, don't have permission to go into the kitchen and cook. The people in the kitchen that are the chefs, they don't have permission to go and look into the living room or the bedroom. So it's like that. So you can basically configure it so it's very, very, very secure from within your own organization, and which adds more security outside. Because if you had everybody accessing everything, for instance, the reason why they do that is if you had everybody able to access everything, a hacker could just strike lucky and hit one person's credentials by accident. Like we said, somebody could step away and have left their terminal open, and then you've got access to the whole of that account. Whereas if only the people within that group have permissions of that group and nothing else, say if a hacker did get in, to say for the example we saw, if a hacker got into one of the users or through one of the users' accounts in the EC2 support group, they still couldn't write anything to the EC2. They couldn't access the S3 or the finance or admin. They could only access that small part. So it helps to lock down security and make it tighter. And that's where um, AWS and the way that they've designed it in terms of security. I'm sure other companies do too, but I can only speak on what I understand and know. The way they've designed it has been a lot tighter because there has been instances where, in the past where people have been able to hack into cloud, so they've had to go back review and look at how can we make security tighter while making this service very functionable. Do you get what I mean?
Okay.
So that's been basically AWS, but AWS identity and access management. So what identity do you assume and what access do you have while being within this AWS account? All right.
Yeah. So you said about EC2 um, and S3 and IAM 3 services, how it works.
And S3 services, and yeah, just I touched on S3 and EC2, but I think they deserve their own space. It was just that I was speaking about them, how they in relation to how IAM works. So maybe in another session it might be S3 and its uses, or it might be EC2 and its uses. I think it'd be good to do a series like.
Yeah. So yeah, series like we decided to talk about uh, uh, auto scheduling, cloud watch, elastic cache, cloud trail security, and security group. So we'll talk about this in the next section.
Yeah, I think it'd be good because I think it's good to break down each thing, kind of what it does first, and then how it interacts with other things. We can mention them, but I think it gets really confusing. I think if people know about it, it's fine. You can roll off a conversation, but I think if there's a first timer that's going, huh? We want to make it. I think if we're teaching it well, or if we're explaining it well, somebody that's never sort of used it before can get an idea of it, and somebody who knows how to use it can say, okay, yes, that makes sense. You're explaining it. Does that? That's the way that I'd like to approach it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The way you're telling is very clear.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot because that's the most important thing to me. Because it doesn't make sense me just banging on about something if people go away going, "Oh, what the hell is she talking about?"
So if you be free tomorrow in the same time, we'll do it with other services that are left.
I won't be able to do tomorrow because I'm one studying and two I've got literally back-to-back meetings. I'll talk to you about that. Let's schedule. Let's offline. Let's log out and then schedule for the next one if that's okay, Si.
Now,
Yeah, once we finish this one, let's schedule for the next one. Is that all right?
uh, after 1 hour, is that okay? Because I have another interview. I will
I,
complete
I'm,
that and I'll come. Yeah.
I can't do today.
Okay.
Let's finish the call and then we can just quickly chat
Yeah.
about the next one when we can do the next one. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah. So at last, can I put this video and audio clip on my YouTube channel, social media, internet, podcast, website, everywhere with your permission?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Kavan, for giving me your valuable time and spending some valuable information and the valuable knowledge of yours.
You're very welcome, Sat, and thank you so much for having the platform and giving me the opportunity. Because, as you saw from my Twitter handle, possibly one of the things that want to do is actually teach people how to use these services, how to be able to function in these roles. So it's been very helpful for me too, and thank you.
Yeah, take care.